Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, we do something from Europe, which is super cool. We have some people who work with founding members of Kosmicare, which is, in oversimplistic terms, the European version of the Zendo project. They do harm reduction, drug testing, which I don't believe Zendo can do, just based on the American laws. But yeah, drug testing in Portugal at Boom Festival. So it is. Today we talked to Helena Valente and Maria Carvalho, both psychologists from Porto, Portugal. And we have a lovely conversation about harm reduction at Boom, their personal backgrounds around how did they get into this work, recreational research, or research of recreational users, which is really interesting. And yeah, what harm reduction looks like, what populations are underserved. And we also get a little bit into the conversation around what are the Portugal drug laws like and what happened in Portugal to get them to this point. As many of you probably know, drug use is decriminalized in Portugal, all substances, to the best of my knowledge. And it's decriminalized. You might get a ticket and you might get a summons to go get evaluated by a group to see if you're okay. Do you need help? You know, what's going on there? So it's really around serving the population as opposed to putting more people in prison, which is kind of what we've got here, unfortunately, in the States. So really appreciate the conversation with Helena and Maria about Kosmicare. I think you'll also love it. So we hope you all love the show today. If you want to support the show, there's a few things you can do. You can write us a review on Facebook or iTunes. We know a lot of you out there have heard this request a lot of times, but it really does make a difference for us. So if you could take just a couple minutes to write us a review, it would help us out quite a bit. If you want to deepen your psychedelic education, we have a great course online called Navigating Psychedelics. It has a ton of content in it. We've had a number of doctors and psychiatrists run through it. They think it is excellent. So if you are a new college student, it would be a great thing to do. If you've got some ayahuasca trips planned or festivals planned, probably check this thing out. It'll save you and your friends quite a bit of suffering to get educated from the curriculum we put together. And not only that, but the experts that we've reached out to help support us. We've got 10 or 12 master classes on there from experts at different sub areas of psychedelia, from ayahuasca experts to integration specialists, and we just go all over the map. So worth checking out. Check it out over at psychedelicstoday.teachable.com. It's called Navigating Psychedelics. And there's even a cheaper option, kind of a 101 that we put out that a lot of people have loved so far. I think we're selling it for about $20. So maybe check that out as well. So I guess we can jump into the show now. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you on the other side. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, we have Maria and Helena from Kosmicare in Portugal. Thank you both for joining me.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having us. It's a real pleasure for us to participate in Psychedelics today.
We're really excited to have you here. So you two are the directors of the project, or what's your role with Kosmicare?
We're both founding members, if you'd like. Nowadays is how we like to be identified. We're founding members of the Kosmicare Association. That's how we would people to recognize us, alongside with a number of other colleagues who have been important to set this new stage of the Kosmicare history. Kosmicare founding members.
All right, perfect. So what part of Portugal are you in?
Well, currently we're in Porto.
Okay.
But we began our intervention at the Boom, which is not in Porto, but Kosmicare now. Both of us, we are from Porto, but we have people from different parts of the country. The Portuguese people collaborating with us, and also people from other countries that have volunteered with the organization.
Porto looks incredibly beautiful.
It is indeed.
Okay, so where do we even start here? Do you have like a really quick description of Kosmicare, and then we can dig into who you are as individuals?
Well, Kosmicare nowadays, it's a non-profit organization, and it works to transform nightlife culture through humanistic, comprehensive, and evidence-based policies and interventions. We actually see a world where drugs can be used with liberty and with wisdom, and where public agencies and private companies also can respect users' human rights and have more comprehensive public policies and more evidence-based practices. So this is what we're actually working for, towards this goal of changing drug policy and make it more comprehensive, I think.
That's really great. The organization as a whole seems very involved in drug policy discussions. And you've done a tremendous job at making festivals safe in Europe, particularly at the Boom. But maybe before we dig too far into what Kosmicare is and what Boom is, let's talk about you as individuals and how you maybe got involved. Whoever would like to go first.
Okay, so I can start. I'm a psychologist. I graduated in 1999 here at the University of Porto. And when I started working mostly in the field of problematic drug use. It has a lot to do with my personal background, growing up in a difficult neighborhood and being schooled in a high school, which was actually inside a very problematic neighborhood, even if I was probably, given the context, maybe considered coming from a privileged family. Even so, this was like a really early wake-up call for drug-related issues. So that was a big motivation to study psychology, actually, the drug-related issues. And then later on, when I finished graduating, the opportunity came to start doing some master's level research and training. And for that purpose, I already chose to go a little bit more into the recreational use. By then, the law in Portugal was changing. It actually started being discussed in 1999 and actually changed in 2001. That 1999 was the year that I graduated. So it was really close to where things started changing very significantly here in Portugal. For my master's studies, however, I did want to focus on recreational uses. I think that I'm like a qualitative researcher, so I kind of relate on the phenomenon of drug use. So it's not such a very conventional perspective for a psychologist. And this means that sometimes the motivations to study things from a certain perspective are actually, you also have to acknowledge that they can also come from a very personal perspective. And growing up, I had like my younger brother, which was quite very much into the starting scene of electronic dance music environments. And I could actually see the differences between how he was positioning himself, experiencing with different substances, and how that was in contrast with what I was learning and the kind of users that I had contact with in my personal training as a psychologist. And that was as an interest grew in me, and I kind of felt driven into studying other sorts of environments and other motivations to use drugs other than feeding a problem. And that was the reason why I already chose to study recreational environments and psychedelic trance festivals for my master's research. And this was the first time I got in contact with Boom. So things moved, and later on in 2008, a long time after this initial interest, I already had a position as a lecturer at the university here in Portugal, the Catholic University of Portugal, in the Faculty of Education and Psychology. And I was still interested in progressing into my studies into studying recreational environments where drugs were happening. And at some point, I noticed an announcement by MAPS in 2008 recruiting volunteers to do this amazing work in Psychedelic Emergency at Boom. And I thought, well, this is the opportunity to marriage both my interests as a psychologist and as someone who has an interest in drug use in recreational environments. So I volunteered. And I volunteered in that edition in 2008 to a project that was already happening for a couple of editions before. And I volunteered for the position of secretary. They chose me for the position of secretary. And well, yeah, that was the first time I got in contact, not with Boom. I'd already been at Boom twice before 2008. But it was the opportunity to actually get really close to what was being done at Kosmicare and at the Psychedelic Emergency. And to actually, from there, that's when I started really getting my interest focused in Psychedelic Emergency. And later on, perhaps, if you want to hear about the story of the project, then it probably starts, my connection to the project probably starts here, and you can discuss it later on. So this is, I ended up doing my PhD in this field as well, trying to understand how different recreational environments related with drug use and with the risk and protection also. And that was that's my personal background. So nowadays, I am still involved in the academic field. I'm still connected to the same institution, the Faculty of Education and Psychology at the Catholic University of Portugal. And I'm also one of the founding members of the Kosmicare Association. So that are my two main professional identity features, I would say, that I could focus now. Helena, do you want to continue?
Well, I'm also a psychologist, and the way I arrive at Kosmicare is a little bit different, but we have a lot of points, I think, in common and in interest. But I'm a psychologist, and I was already particularly interested in drug use. And when I was still graduating, I was still studying, I wanted to have some field experience, and I had the opportunity of volunteering in a low threshold program that gives methadone and needle exchange and something like that with a local NGO. And I started doing that. And that was, I don't know, maybe 2003, 2004. And at that point in time, they were starting to develop this harm reduction project to work in recreational settings and party settings. But they were lacking people. They were quite inexperienced in this field. They were just starting, and I really liked to go to parties at the time and partying. So they invited me and they asked me, "Do you want to volunteer with us? Because it's maybe more interesting for you, and maybe you have a better profile to this sort of work." And that made sense to me. I was actually more interested in this kind of context. And it started there. I started with this project, and eventually I worked there and coordinated for over 10 years. And in 2006, the project started offering drug checking. And I got particularly interested in this type of service and the potential that drug checking has as a harm reduction strategy and has a market monitoring strategy. And from then on, I worked in an NGO, and I've started researching around drug checking. At the moment, I have a scholarship, and I'm doing my PhD, studying the impact that drug checking has on people's drug use behaviors, on drug use patterns, and things like that. And at the same time, because I think that there's a lot to be done in terms of drug policy and the type of harm reduction that you can offer in festivals and how complete it can be, we've decided to expand Kosmicare work from Boom and create this NGO. And one of our objectives, I think, in short term would be actually to have a drop-in and a place where people can come and meet us, not only in parties, but also as a permanent service. And they can actually come and test their drugs whenever they need. And I think this is at least one of my personal main goals at the moment. And I think one of Kosmicare also. And so I guess soon we'll also be crowdfunding to have this more permanent space where people can come and meet us and to sort of transport this harm reduction that we do in festivals and start doing it in a more regular base. So yeah, I think this is it for my professional and also a bit personal background and how we got into harm reduction. I think this is it.
Well, thank you both for that. I really admire the story and the timing too. It's magical, really, that you're both coming up at the right time to get involved with this NGO, and it's done a tremendous amount of good. Do you have any numbers for how many people you helped maybe at this year's Boom?
Sure. Well, we're starting to treat the data. It really depends. Well, I'm more linked, like I've told you, to our drug info stand and to the drug checking area. We're sort of divided in Kosmicare this year tried to offer like a full spectrum harm reduction service that goes from the drug information and counseling and a small resting space and the drug checking service, and then a psychedelic crisis hub. And obviously the number of people that come to both of these services are different due to their characteristics. But I would say to the drug info, we usually have over 2,000 people. A lot of people come. And 20,000, yeah, you're right. Maria is correcting me. I said 2,000. I meant 20,000, which is a lot more. Yeah, 20,000 people. And this year in the drug checking service, for the first time, we usually do thin layer chromatography, which is more of a qualitative technique that allows us to separate different substances and allows us to see the adulterants in a sample. But this year, for the first time, with a partnership of the Spanish harm reduction team, Energy Control, and also with the support of Isomer Design, we were able also to have an HPLC, a high performance liquid chromatography, working, and to quantify pills and LSD blotters. And this was amazing, was an amazing opportunity to offer this to people. But it meant that we sort of tested, I think, 753 drug samples in, I think, 7 days. And we have many people lining up and coming to the service. And sometimes we have really long queues. But the human and material resources that we have at the moment don't allow us to test more. Hopefully in future years, we'll be able to test for everyone that's interested in testing. But I would say that in the drug checking, probably we have, like that, around 700 people, different people, because then people test different samples, but I would say maybe different people. And then in the info stand, around 20,000, something like that. So it's a lot of people coming to this side of the harm reduction services.
So that you have an idea, this means that approximately half of the Boom population eventually gets in contact with the drugs info stand. And for the Psychedelic Emergency hub, we over time we have been trying to understand what is the Boom population that we work for, and we kind of came up with the idea that we are working in terms of Psychedelic Emergency for around 1% of Boom population. So this means that every edition since 2012 until this year, we get something that's a number that can vary slightly between the 400 and the 350 cases at the Psychedelic Emergency services. which are distributed over around a period of 9 days, perhaps. Because even when we just want to focus on training the team, there's already some cases coming up that we have to deal with. So we end up having a slightly lengthier and slightly bigger coverage in terms of activity days in the psychedelic emergency services than what happens in the info stand and the drug checking services. So that's this year in particular, we had 355 situations, I believe.
It actually seems to me like a really low number, given it's a 20,000 person festival. But perhaps that speaks to the relative safety.
It's not 20,000. It's actually like around 35,000.
35. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's a tremendously awesome. What is that? Less than 1%. It's like 0.1% would then interact with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
And you have to see that these episodes at the Psychedelic Emergency Hub, they actually end up being much more diverse than the episodes themselves, who have to do with psychospiritual or another kind of emergency. So we actually take care of a number of diverse situations that don't just have to do with problems triggered by drugs. We actually deal with situations that might not have even any kind of substance use involved.
Right. I hear that from Zendo too. It's like you could have just had something really bad happen to you or something, or be nervous about who knows what. Your trauma is just coming up for you because you're overwhelmed at the enormity of and incredible nature of the festival, right?
Exactly. Yes. Imagine you got robbed or lost from your friends, or you're just overwhelmed with so much stimuli and you haven't been able to sleep properly and you're exhausted. And that also triggers challenges at the personal level. And of course, our resources are limited, and we need to guarantee that we're available for the more serious situations. But we hardly ever leave anyone unattended, even if they're very distanced from the psychedelic emergency focus. And all of those are included in these numbers.
That's great. So maybe we can kind of define boom. We defined Kosmicare very briefly at the beginning, but how do you define boom? I think of it as the European Burning Man, but I don't know if that's fair.
Well, I think it's difficult for us to say because unfortunately, neither of us had the opportunity to go to Burning Man, but I hope that changes in the very near future.
Good.
And have the opportunity to go
to compare.
But I understand the comparison, and I think a lot of people do it somehow because boom, it's a transformational festival, and you gather people from so many places together, and it's
actually, Helena, it's like over 45 countries or 52 countries last edition.
I think, yeah, I would say that. And we have I would even say more nationalities. I think just in the drug checking service, in the last years, we had people from 35 different countries just coming to the drug checking. So it's a gathering of very special people and very knowledgeable people, and where art meets music and personal growth and a pursuit of a more ecological and sustainable world. So I think it's a sort of somehow an utopia that you have the opportunity to live over a week, but also in a way, I think that the experience stays with people and gives you an opportunity to practice some of the things that you experience in boom than in your life. So I think it's usually some sort of transcendental experience for people. For some people, not for all, obviously. For some, I think it's just a festival where people go to have fun and have the opportunity of use drugs. But
which is an equally legitimate
experience. But I think that's it. There's a lot of potential there and a lot of things happening at the same time. I think sometimes you're there when you look at the program and you say, oh, this happened. I was here. I had no idea, because it's difficult to manage so many things happening at the same time. But I think Burning Man, it's a bit like that. I imagine it is. So I could understand the comparison. One thing that I think it's very different, and it's particularly better for people that use drugs, it's that Boom is in Portugal. So we fortunately have a much more friendlier legal framework for drug use than people do at the United States. And I think that probably makes a difference on the type of services that we can offer, and also on the relationship people can establish with drugs. But I don't know, because I haven't been in Burning Man to know how really drug use is framed within the festival and how the harm reduction services operate. But in terms of what happens in the rest of the world, although the Portuguese legal framework is not perfect and it's still prohibitionist, it gives us quite a nice base to work from. So I think that's a big difference, and I think it in some ways it really helps the festival to go well, and it's probably maybe one of the reasons why you were surprised with the low number of psychedelic emergencies that we have to deal with at Boom. It's because drug policy actually does have an impact, I think, even if indirect, in how people use their drugs.
I could totally see that. In the US, it's really a scary place for drug users, and like many other places in the world, it's not it's not the worst place in the world to use drugs. Other places you can just get killed. But in Burning Man in Nevada, that's one of the states with the highest or most difficult penalties in the country. So that's really scary. And there are undercover police regularly around Burning Man. One thing that I find interesting is, as I talk to more people who attend Burning Man, I see that it's more than just Zendo. It's like the ideology behind Zendo has kind of pervaded a little bit, and plenty of places around Burning Man have a spot for people to have their emergencies and be kind of supported. Maybe not as comprehensively as at Zendo, but at least it's kind of spread out across that zone. That's actually really huge. I'm sure Boom is also really huge. Do you know how many kilometers wide it is?
We should know that, actually.
Well, you can say minutes. How many minutes does it take to walk across?
Oh, definitely like 45 minutes, definitely.
The whole festival, yeah maybe 45 minutes, 1 hour.
That's huge. Yeah. That's without stopping, probably, right? So,
yeah, it's huge.
It's very big.
Yeah.
Is it just Kosmicare, or are there other like smaller little harm reduction tents opening up here and there?
They're not actually other organized or intentional harm reduction strategies being put up there other than the interventions we do with Kosmicare. And the Drugs Info Hub and the drug checking sites are located very close to the Dance Temple, which is the central area of the festival. Then Kosmicare, Psychedelic Emergency is located a little bit more distanced and on a more quiet area. I wouldn't really say that there are more harm reduction strategies being put up other than these, but you can actually see that, and this is something that I really always like to stress out, because we have the privilege also of accompanying all the production efforts before Boom is actually open for public. And this is a lengthy process that goes over a number of preparation meetings where we are already involved as harm reduction project and has Kosmicare Association. And we actually can see all the effort that is put into guaranteeing the best possible efforts being offered to lower people's challenges of being at boom. So you will have a number of smaller strategies being set up, which include shaded areas and social hubs close to the camping areas, and small restaurants and areas where you can get food and beverages, which are really well spread out over the field. And you get like a number of production efforts really are aimed into lowering the effort that people have to go through in terms of their personal challenges, in terms of dealing with the heat and with the tiredness and all of the challenges that are involved in being such a long period of time in a big area like that, with such high temperatures and with such long distances to walk. This year in particular, we have had a different approach, complementary, I would say, like additional efforts being put up in guaranteeing that the potentially dangerous situations and the potentially dangerous crises were actually being spotted with a short period of time. And for that, the Boom production this year around has created like two central areas, which are close to the Alchemy Circle, the second biggest dance floor, and the dance temple, the biggest dance floor. We had this year like two smaller advanced location posts with two teepees, which were actually very close to the dance areas. And this in these two teepees, we had like a small representation of a Kosmicare team and also a medical emergency team. So this actually was a way of ensuring that situations that were happening were actually being assisted on the shortest period of time possible. So we actually gathered a number of our cases from these advanced locations, and we could pick them up with our car and then bring them up to the Psychedelic Emergency Hub for proper assistance. So this was really helpful this year. It was an initiative from Broom Production, and it was very helpful in guaranteeing that the higher risk situations were actually getting a response in a shorter period of time possible, in terms of lowering the high risk that those situations might involve.
That's really great. I assume it gets really hot, right? It's middle of the summer. Is that right?
Yeah. You'd say 42, 43 Celsius, Yikes. Something like that. It gets really hot.
That translates to 107, 108 Fahrenheit. That's terrifying.
No, but there's a lot of water. There's a lot of water. There's a beautiful bay, and you can bathe yourself, and so it's really nice. And there's a lot of shaded areas, a lot of water points for people to drink, so it's bearable.
It's a big difference in comparison with Burning Man. Now, have a water element,
right?
It makes a lot of difference.
Right. Just for reference, where I live, it typically doesn't get hotter than 23 Celsius in the middle of summer.
Wow.
So I get nervous when I think about it.
It gets really cold in winter, or no? It's always
kind of, yeah. It's high in the mountains, so it can get really, really cold.
Okay.
It's fascinating to me to hear that, Helena, I think it was you saying you're researching recreational users, and I don't hear much about that, especially in use cases where it's like, I don't know how to say this, but somewhat healthy drug use. It's not turned to the point where it's addictive or like really, really self-destructive yet. It's like once or twice a year you go big at a festival, and that seems like a really interesting and fruitful area of study. And I've not heard of people doing that before.
Well, I think actually Maria was saying that I think her PhD versus on that, but with the drug checking, we also had the opportunity to analyze a bit how people manage their drug use. And actually this year we asked everyone and we surveyed a lot of people about the harm reduction strategies that they put in place when they use drugs. And what you see is that you have a lot of people that use drugs as a part of their life repertoire or something like that. And I would say it's once or twice a year. I would say some people use drugs a lot more often than that, sometimes every week, and some people every day, depending on the substance.
Right.
And still they manage to do a very, how would I say, they manage to actually have quite a controlled drug use that does not interfere with major aspects in their life. But it does in a beneficial way, because drug use also has a lot of benefits. And a lot of people know how to potentiate that and to manage the eventual damage that might come from drug use. For example, what we see with a lot of the people that come to us at the Boom, I think it's this, that people really are clever in employing strategies to use drugs and to still take the best out of that drug use, and to grow personally from that use, or to have a lot of fun without a big problem. I actually think that most of us, I would say, use some type of psychoactive substances and don't have any problems from that. So I think most of the people are drug users and don't have a problematic drug use. Only very few people, I think, develop issues with drugs and problematic drug use. And there's many studies at this point, not so many, because I think recreational drug use, it's not so interesting to study from maybe from a few people's point of view, because it gives you this idea that people can use drugs and still be very functional, and that might not interest to all sides of society and to more conservative part of society. But I think there's a lot of quite a big research background on this area that shows that people are clever and doing so. I think Matt Southwell uses a terminology that I really like, which is that drug users, some obviously, are calculated risk takers. So they sort of evaluate the risk of their use and the benefits, and they sort of decide within this continuum of risk and benefit. And I think that suits a lot of the users that we deal with. Obviously, not everyone is a calculated risk taker, and a lot of people have relationships with drugs and have problems. And it's also very naive to think that all our decisions concerning drug use are rational, and that all drug use is only influenced by the decisions of the users. A lot of people that have problematic drug use have structural issues like poverty or other stuff that sort of determines the way their relationship it's gonna go with drugs. I also think that the legal framework has a terrible influence on that.
I would 100% agree. Yes.
So there's a lot of variables here, but for sure, I think we definitely know at this point in time, because research has said that way, and there's robust evidence of that there's many possibilities to relate with drugs, and most people are non-problematic drug users for sure. Probably you want to add something on this, Maria, because this is your theme also.
The perspective that I want to add on this subject is really very close to the work that we've been doing at the Psychedelic Emergency. We've had very, very important challenges and very groundbreaking challenges in Kosmicare, Psychedelic Emergency. So in 2016, someone died on us, which is really something that is known and that it's no use in trying to go around it. So someone died while having a psychedelic emergency at our services. And so this actually was something that personally, not just for me, but for everybody involved in that particular moment in time in Kosmicare Psychedelic Emergency, personally, it was a very, very important personal challenge that made me question a lot about the reasons to do this work, the representations that we were basing upon to actually who were the people that we were doing this work for. Because I was under the impression, clearly a wrong one, that we were working for the unexperienced user, like for the person who was caught off guard, who actually was saving their most challenging experiences to that special environment that boom is, who were probably surprised with a very potent substance or even an adulterated one. And they were actually caught off guard, actually. So really being surprised with something that was overwhelming and actually having to deal with a physical challenge for the body that wouldn't be able to deal with that. And actually the episode that we were faced upon, and the loss of a life is something that is really very, very challenging, as you might imagine. No, it makes you question everything about what are you doing this for, who are you doing it for. And this made me question a lot about who is the person that we are working for, which is the average user of the psychedelic emergency services. And knowing something, and not, of course, not everything that we wanted to know, but at least something about this person's background, we actually knew that wasn't the way to explain what happened. We were talking about a very experienced user. We were talking about someone who was actually very close to the scene, someone who was not using adulterated substances. And it was a big lesson for me in terms of actually not judging who is our public, and not judging, not assuming what is the profile, the average profile that we were working for. That does not exist, actually. You actually need to acknowledge that people may actually go over the top for a very, very wide variety of motivations. And it's not our business, actually, to make any kind of judgment and any kind of assumption about what brings them to that point. This was the biggest lesson that I think I've learned from doing the psychedelic emergency services up to this day. I remember I went to the 2016 edition of Kosmicare. We were already counting with over, I don't know, maybe 700 emergencies by that point. And I was really feeling like this huge strength that we could probably deal with anything that came up. This was like a huge, what's the word? Like a huge assumption of myself. I was full of myself, actually. I remember actually saying this at the Liminal Village the exact day before we had this huge challenge. And I regret it to this day. I thought, what the hell? What was I thinking of? No, it was like a huge slap on my face to understand that, of course, you can get surprised, and in a very, very negative and potent way. So to this day, nowadays, I think that what this challenging situation has brought to us, to all the team, and to me in particular, was that you do not make assumptions about the reasons why people do what they do. Their motivations might be as diverse as they possibly can, and you're just there for them, and you don't make any judgments. I thought I wasn't doing them, but actually after this happened, I was, and this made me question a lot of things, and it took a long time and many months to integrate it, of course. So I do not have an answer for why do people do recreational drugs. I do not have an answer on their motivations. I do not have an answer about how they manage or don't manage the relation they have with risk. They can be actually very, very experienced and still do a lot of stupid things, and it's their right. And you just need to do your best. And also acknowledge your limitations, because when things go wrong, there's not much that you can actually do to save a life. You can actually try and guarantee the best possible means to do that, and we surely had them. And I'm quite in peace about that. If this person had collapsed in front of a urban hospital in the middle of the city, of a big city in a Western world, they would not have been assisted more quickly and with better means. There was actually nothing we could do for him. But yeah, so that's a big lesson I got. No, you do not make assumptions on people's motivations. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Fascinating.
About that.
And I can really relate to that. I've seen a lot of goofy stuff and not sure what's going on, and it sometimes looks really dangerous, but you just don't know what people are making decisions around. And I imagine with research, you could probably come up with 50 categories for each of those things. But, is that enough categories? I don't know. And does it even help? Is it useful is the real question. And I don't know. And this maybe for research, but for harm reduction, probably not. And it seems like y'all are doing a great job. And, it's always tough to lose somebody. But you didn't make them eat the drugs, right? You did as much as you could. And it's something we got to pay attention to. And, Zendo doesn't have a perfect record, but they've done really great and have really helped a lot of folks. Do you have a collaborative relationship with Zendo?
We do. We've been cooperating with Zendo since a way back. Actually, so MAPS was actually in charge of doing Kosmicare for a number of editions. They were hired by Boom to promote the psychedelic emergency services from the early days. No, in the 2002, 2004, 2006 editions. All those interventions were, and even the 2008 editions, all of those editions were made with with the MAP support, and it was actually MAP always laid the foundations and the principles to do the work in this kind of environments, basing upon transpersonal psychology and how to deal with unsupervised situations of psychedelic use from Groff's perspective and from transpersonal psychologist's perspective. And we borrowed, of course, from that background. And we've been welcoming Zendo's representatives from many editions. We had the pleasure to welcome Rick himself for a number of editions, and Lanai and Sarah Gale and Brooke this last edition. So we're close friends. I would like to think of ourselves as close friends. And we do have a lot of experience to share. I do wish that in the near future, we could actually upgrade this cooperation to a more integrated research project that actually can compare different realities and different environments and different populations and different drug use trends and different features of the psychedelic emergency crisis episodes that we attend. That would be a really important upgrade to our collaboration that I think that we can achieve in the near future. But yes, we are close, not only with Zendo, but with a number of other projects in Europe that are also doing their best to provide these kinds of services. We do that from the perspective of drug checking and the harm reduction and the info stand, but which are always been done with a collaborative basis with other projects in Europe. But we are also trying to build up that kind of communication with other colleagues all over the world, from Israel to Australia to all over Europe. So Kosmicare actually welcomes every edition. At the Psychedelic Emergency Services and at the info stand, there's a team of 120 people doing all the three full spectrum integrated services. And of course, a significant part of these colleagues are coming from other projects all over the world. And they're coming to learn from us, and we also, of course, we learn from them. And I think we still have a lot of progression that we can do from that collaboration. We can actually start going more to their projects.
I think we have to keep getting people, but we also need to go more. Yeah. Definitely we have to go to Zendo.
Yeah, we have to go to Zendo. I
think that's a priority.
I'll see you there next year. It sounds like you have a really good reason to go.
Yeah, but I guess Burning Man has a lot of preparation.
Oh, yes.
For the quite poor Portuguese people,
it's a challenge.
It's quite a challenge.
I bet you could get maps to help you out, figuring it out at least. Worth at least asking them.
Rick, if you're listening to Joe,
let's cross fingers.
Don't forget it. Pay attention to what Joe's saying, Rick.
Rick, we got to keep Europe safe as well. Sarah, let's do it. Yeah, it's, they do a lot of festivals, right? They do Lightning in a Bottle, Burning Man, a lot of other organizations have them. What's interesting to me is that there's so many festivals in the U.S. Happening at small and large scales without these services, because you might be familiar with the laws around, what do they call it, the Rave Act, where they can essentially take all of your assets, like anything you own, if you are knowingly harboring drug users, and making a safe environment for drug users. Like, you can pretty much lose everything you own, which is really scary. Thank God for Portugal's laws. I just really wish we could universalize that a little bit. I know it is prohibitionist, but it's a huge improvement over what we've got here.
Absolutely. I always like to remind people of that, because I think it is important to know it is prohibitionist, and there's still a way to go, definitely. But obviously it's not comparable, and the way it impacts on people's health. And usually what we say is that even more than just the fact that the law allows people to, doesn't allow, but it's not a crime, it decriminalized drug use. It's also the fact that along with this law came the possibility of opening a huge number of services for people that use drugs, and to sort of create a legal framework around harm reduction. For example, Portugal is one of the few countries in the world where drug checking is allowed by law. So when you were saying that you have undercover policemen or policewomen in Burning Man, well, you can also have that in Boom, but that doesn't interfere at all with the work that we're doing. For example, we have people queuing for drug checking, really long lines of people queuing, and they have their drug samples with them, and the police might be there, but they are aware of the work that we're doing, and they do not interfere with our work in any way, because they understand what we're doing. They understand the health potential that is involved. And actually, sometimes you can even think of ways of cooperating with the police in a way to promote public health, and not only the best for the people that use drugs, but for the community. So I think it's this broader thing, not only of decriminalizing drugs, but also of giving people frontline services, and that major change in Portugal. And the results for the Portuguese drug policy speak for themselves in terms of overdoses, of drug-related deaths, and of HIV infection, tuberculosis, and a lot of things. Not to mention all the costs with incarceration and other types of drug-related issues. So I think the evidence speaks for itself in that sense. So other countries like the US should definitely rethink, I think, their policies, particularly now that you're dealing with all these opioid crisis. You would see that in Portugal last year, you only have like 12 overdose cases related with heroin and with other opioids. So I think the difference is evident when you come to think of the influence law and health services might have.
Can we talk briefly about the state Portugal was in before those laws went into place in the late 90s? Or 2001, I forget what year you said it was. Was there a big epidemic of some kind, or an AIDS issue, or What was happening at that point?
Well, the law. Well, in the 80s, we started having this heroin epidemic, and a lot of people using heroin in open air sites, a lot of injection. And obviously that had a tremendous impact on bloodborne infections, particularly HIV. So Portugal had really high infection rates of HIV and a high percentage of people with problematic drug use. Over 1% of the Portuguese population at a point in time had to deal with a heroin crisis. And I think, from my perspective, this was extremely relevant in promoting the change of our legal framework. Because while it was only a problem, and I think when it's only a problem related with more vulnerable people and just certain types of people and certain individuals, it doesn't really concern politicians or the communities in general. But at this point in time, almost any family in Portugal had someone with a problematic heroin use. So it was affecting middle classes, upper classes. The whole society was seeing the costs of this heroin epidemic. I think you can call it like that. And that really, the heroin use was transversal to society. And I think this motivated the policy change, because it started to affect everyone and not only the poorest and the more excluded people. I don't think it's the nicest reason to change a law, but I'm pretty sure that's what motivated the change. But it was a good change. They created this commission, it was discussed. And at this point in time, the Portuguese society, I think, was ready to make this move, because it was very evident that prohibition was not working. And the results speak for themselves, as I said. And I think maybe at the United States they're in a similar point, because I believe that this fentanyl crisis is affecting all types of citizens. So it might be also a good way to look at advocacy, and because sometimes when you only affect more vulnerable parts of the population, people tend to be less receptive of changing drug laws.
It's a really awkward situation, and you're totally right. Like, people don't really care when I talk about poor folks and drug issues like this, but I say, like, a very famous director died from fentanyl-laced cocaine, and they care. It's really tricky, but I think it's
horrible. It's the truth. It's the horrible truth.
But you know what? At the same time, now we're facing with a totally opposite dilemma, which is that in Portugal these days, the biggest slot of the budget that is allocated into drug-related interventions is actually still being associated with problematic drug use. And you know that problematic drug use is actually nowadays like a very, very small percentage of drug use. And you have like huge challenges for people who use drugs who actually are not very problematic in terms of their health related drug use related health problems, or in terms of their social integration, because they're well educated, they have jobs. They're very normative, actually. They're very socially adjusted, which does not mean that they don't have to deal with huge risk and challenges concerning some aspects of their drug use behaviors. But still, the biggest part of the problem of the budget is associated with like IV use and syringe exchange programs and heroin addiction. And you know that those users in the Portuguese society nowadays are like a geriatric population, actually. They have age-related problems. They're not an increasing population. They're changing their drug using habits, and they're changing it into for example, moving away from IV use to, for example, smoked use. They're moving away from heroin and towards crack use. And they actually have a lot of needs that don't really have much to do with what is being offered these days. And quite on the opposite side, you have a growing number of very socially integrated drug users, recreational drug users who are submitted to considerable risks, even so. But because those risks are not so socially visible and they're not so disturbing in terms of the balance and the impact they have on society, they're also not getting enough attention. And it's quite challenging these days to actually achieve that point in conquering some space in the budget that's being offered to drug-related issues, because we're working for in what concerns the official and the government politics. We're working for the non-problematic ones, the ones that don't really cause any public nuisance or any public impact, the ones that they're not out there like harassing people with needles, or they're not involved with criminality. They're not involved with public health problems. So they do not have enough impact in society overall to be relevant enough for budget to be allocated to their problems. But they can actually die on a while driving their cars back home after 2 or 3 days partying very hard. And you're just not caring enough about that because it's not such a big problem, and these people are not problematic enough. That's a really big concern we have, and we're trying to also with Kosmicare Association to try and shift the focus towards this apparently unproblematic population, because they do come across a wide range of risks, much easier to come across with than what you might think. And of course, you always need to deal with the problematic population, and you'll have to deal with the challenges they face upon, which are very serious socially and economically, and their vulnerability is huge. Even so, the phenomenon these days, drug use phenomenon, has become much more diversified, and it's become a normalized issue in society. And you have to deal with the specific needs of a very wide range of population. And who are we to define who is entitled and deserving of attention? So this is a big challenge here in Portugal with our good laws. Apparently, we have to deal with. I
think what Maria is trying to say is that Kosmicare is working with no governmental funding at this point. So
right. It's got to be a real challenge figuring out how to fund something of that scale. Go ahead, sorry.
Every project that is trying to do something for recreational drug users, which are probably the large majority of users, is facing this kind of challenge, not only in Portugal, but probably all over Europe and the Western world. So this is something that we need to acknowledge now, that risk exists, and we don't want to overemphasize it. We want to deal with it reasonably and sensibly, but we really need to move forward and understand that, of course, the North American reality with the fentanyl crisis is very different. You're dealing with a huge epidemic, with a huge loss of life, and that must be acknowledged, of course, for the seriousness and the threat that it represents. But in Europe, actually, it's become like this apparently peaceful way of relating with drug use. And we really want we don't want to make problems where they do not exist, but we actually also need to acknowledge that we are working for a group of population that it's not being taken into account, because they do not make enough noise, and they do not have enough stigma around them, and that's not fair either, in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, we just hit the hour point of recording. And I feel like we could really talk for a lot of hours. So let's maybe wrap up. Where would you like people to go to learn more about you or Kosmicare?
our Facebook, no?
Yeah, well, at this moment in time, our website is under construction, but they already have some of our materials there, but we're working on this at the moment, but it's www.kosmicare.org. But we're investing on our Facebook at the moment, and it's Kosmicare, like Kosmicare, and you can find us there in the Facebook page, and we post every day, and we try to keep active and give you news about what's happening. And soon we'll have the website ready and maybe some other platforms of communicating with people. So, but we can send you this info.
That would be lovely, and I'm sure we can find it too. But thank you both, Helena and Maria from Kosmicare. Really appreciate your time and hope people check it out. Your website's, even though it's under construction, it's still great. Those graphics, I think, are really important. And hopefully people check those out as well. So thank you again, and hopefully we can have you on the show again in the future.
Hopefully
we
we'll
would
have
love to. Yes,
more interesting things to tell you and keep talking. Thanks for having us again, Joe. It's a pleasure.
So there you have it, Maria Carvalho and Helena Valente of Kosmicare, coming at you from Porto, Portugal. It's a very different place from where I'm at in Breckenridge, Colorado, living on a beach versus high altitude Chile mountains. So it was a real pleasure to talk to them and learn more about what's going on in Europe. And I hope you appreciate it. It's good to get a perspective of what's going on elsewhere in the world, and really glad they actually reached out to us. So if you're interested in learning more, check them out at Kosmicare.org and on Facebook. I know their website's under maintenance currently, but there's still some really cool stuff there to check out. And yeah, if you want to send them donations, feel free. So if you want to support the show, thanks again for listening. Maybe the best thing you can do is share with a friend. Send them maybe your favorite episode, or maybe even have a dinner party. Say, hey guys, check out this podcast. We can talk about it over dinner. Same way people do book clubs. Why not have a podcast club? Yeah, so we've got a lot of stuff to sell if you're interested in helping support us. Costs a bunch to keep the lights on over here as we try to build something meaningful for this community. So anything helps. We've got t-shirts and mugs for sale at psychedelicstodayshop.com. And we've even got books over there, like a trip journal and integration workbook. We even sell coaching calls. So this last week, I actually helped 2 people, and it was really incredible. Just a little bit of conversation can really catapult you to kind of like get out of, if you're feeling despair, or anxiety, or confusion, or whatever it is. Maybe our experience, sharing our experience with you and talking about what's going on in your world can help you out. It might give you a little bit of direction on where you need to head. Obviously, there are licensed professionals out there, and maybe you go to them first. There's the MAPS integration list, and we've got our blog post. So you want to find a psychedelic guide, which kind of talks about this issue quite in depth. Maybe you want to go there first. But if you want to talk to us, we would love it. We sell our sessions on the same website, psychedelicstodayshop.com. So feel free to book something there with us, and we'd love to talk to you. And we also have classes. So Navigating Psychedelics, which you've heard us talk about at length, is available. It's really extensive and will really level up your psychedelic education. We also have a class called DMTX, Psychonaut Training. So check that out too. It's with Daniel McQueen and Kyle running through the whole DMTX curriculum, kind of flight school. It's a really interesting project, scary at times, but also amazing at times. So check that out also over at psychedelicstoday.teachable.com. Thank you all for tuning in to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore, your host, signing off from Breckenridge, Colorado. Bye-bye.